You wouldn't expect the ruins of a dynasty to greet you with a BMW's cough and rattle, but that was the only way Sebastian Ashworth ever returned to Ashworth Estate. Windows stuck, radio broken, the air inside thick with the musty tang of neglect and lost pride. The iron gates stood crooked, one half off its hinges, the crest of a fox, and crossed riding crops tarnished beyond saving. Victoria, his older sister, sat at the wheel with her jaw clenched tight, knuckles white against the steering wheel, eyes locked on the crumbling silhouette of the house rising out of the wild Cotswolds grass. Neither of them spoke as the car bumped up the gravel path, potholes swallowing the tires, weeds choking what used to be a carriage road. Sebastian's left leg throbbed with every jolt, his cane balanced awkwardly against the passenger seat, a constant reminder of the afternoon 3 years ago that rewrote the future for both of them. Ashworth Estate, once the jewel of Gloucestershire, now looked like a haunted relic. Windows boarded, roof tiles missing, paddocks gone to seed. Even the wind seemed to sigh with the weight of ghosts. As Victoria cut the engine, Sebastian stared at the old manor through the cracked windshield. He remembered laughter echoing through those halls, his mother's voice, firm, loving, legendary, calling orders before dawn, training horses for the Royal Windsor Show. He remembered running, wild and whole, before the accident. Now he just breathed in the silence, thick and stifling, broken only by the tap of raindrops on glass. Inside, cobwebs draped the portrait of Lady Margaret Ashworth, their mother, the first woman ever to win the badminton horse trials. Her smile seemed to fade a little more every year. Victoria's heels clicked on the marble floor as she strode ahead, a faded letter from the solicitor trembling in her fist. "We have 6 months," she whispered, almost to herself, as if afraid the walls would hear her weakness. 6 months before the bank takes everything. Sebastian followed, the cold stone biting through his shoe. He paused in front of his mother's painting. The memory crashed over him, vivid as a summer storm. That day, foxhounds baying, horses snorting, sunlight flickering through autumn leaves. Then chaos, a slip, a shout, the impossible crunch of bone and timber. The world spun red and black. When he woke, his mother was gone, and so was his future on horseback. No one ever talked about it out loud. Outside, the old stables loomed, once the heart of the estate, now just a shell, doors hanging open, the scent of rot and old hay floating on the wind. Sebastian moved slowly, careful on the uneven stones, ignoring Victoria's plea for him to stay inside. He needed to see what had become of the horses, the legacy. What he found in the farthest stall stopped him cold. A shadow shifted in the gloom. There, lying on a pile of moldy straw, was Wellington, the pride of the estate, the stallion who'd conquered the Royal Windsor Horse Show, once worth more than the entire Ashworth library. Now he was little more than a skeleton draped in a faded brown coat, his hind leg twisted and swollen, eyes sunk but glimmering with the stubborn spark of life. Sebastian's throat tightened. He called out softly, the name catching on his lips. Wellington flicked an ear, then tried to stand, collapsing again with a hoarse, pained whinny. The sight was almost too much to bear. Such majesty brought so low, forgotten by everyone except the dust and the spiders. "Sebastian, come away!" Victoria's voice sliced through the silence, sharp, angry, but lined with fear. She froze at the door, the sight of Wellington shocking her into silence. For a heartbeat, the siblings just stared, the weight of 3 lost years pressing down on both of them. "We left him," Sebastian whispered. "We left all of them." A crack of thunder split the sky outside. Rain began to fall in sheets, drumming on the tin roof. Sebastian limped into the stall, ignoring the grime, sinking to his knees beside Wellington. He ran a trembling hand down the horse's neck, feeling every ridge of bone. Victoria stood at the threshold, tears threatening. "We can't save him. We can't even save ourselves." Sebastian shook his head. "He's alive. That's enough. I won't let him die here alone in the dark. Not like this." The rain picked up, washing away any comfort the day might have held. From somewhere deeper in the stables, a door creaked open, a movement just out of sight. Sebastian flinched, hand tightening on his cane, but only the wind answered. He thought for a moment he heard boots scraping across stone, a low voice humming a tune from his childhood. Was it a ghost? Or just the estate itself, restless, hungry for memory? Victoria pulled him up, her resolve hardening. "We need to call someone. Maybe Dr. Hollis." Sebastian cut her off. "He's not a vet, Vic. He's a butcher with a license. I want someone who cares." Victoria stared at her brother, seeing for the first time the fire in his eyes, the stubborn glint that always marked an Ashworth in the hunt. For a second, she wavered. Then a distant crack, another door slamming in the wind. "Fine," she said. "But if you do this, you're on your own. I have enough on my plate with the estate. I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose you too." Sebastian said nothing, just kept his hand on Wellington's neck, feeling the slow, trembling beat of the old champion's heart. And above them, the storm rolled on. The estate waking from its 3-year nightmare, secrets swirling in the shadows, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to drag them into the light. The morning after discovering Wellington felt like the world had shifted its axis. The storm had passed, but the sky remained heavy with a bruised, gray light. Sebastian barely slept. He lay awake on his narrow bed, listening to the rain drip from broken gutters, thinking about Wellington, about the way the horse's breath rattled in the stale air, the resignation in his eyes. When dawn broke, Sebastian found himself staring at the faded ceiling, determined. No more sleepwalking through ruins. If Wellington could survive 3 years of neglect, then so could he. He hobbled out into the chilly morning, ignoring the ache in his leg. The air outside was thick with the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. Victoria was already awake, standing by the kitchen window, staring out at the estate's endless green. The tension between them was palpable, an unspoken fear that everything was slipping away, piece by piece. Sebastian made a quick cup of tea and left, letting the door swing shut behind him. The stables looked even worse in daylight. A curtain of mist clung to the ground, turning the yard into something out of a ghost story. Sebastian found Wellington just as he'd left him, shivering but alert, eyes following every move. Sebastian grabbed an old feed bucket, filled it with oats scavenged from a forgotten storage room, and knelt by the stall. He spoke quietly, his words more for himself than the horse. "You survived. That's all that matters. We're both a little broken, but we're not done yet." Wellington nuzzled the bucket, devouring the oats with desperate hunger. As Sebastian worked, he heard footsteps behind him, slow, measured, the tread of someone who belonged here but hadn't been seen in a long time. "Shouldn't feed him too quickly, lad," a deep voice called from the shadows, carrying the authority of old command. "His gut's gone soft. He needs time, or you'll founder him." Sebastian twisted around, startled. An old man stood at the entrance to the stable, his frame tall but a little stooped, shoulders draped in a battered waxed jacket, a walking stick in one hand. His gray hair was wild, his eyes sharp and appraising. Colonel Edmund Fairfax, legendary trainer, former coach to the Royal Cavalry, and according to local gossip, a recluse who'd vanished after a scandal years ago. Sebastian straightened, wary but curious. Colonel Fairfax? The old man nodded, eyes flicking from Sebastian to Wellington and back again. You're Ashworth's boy. The one who used to ride like the devil was after you. He stepped forward, boots squelching in the mud. I saw your car last night. Thought I'd introduce myself before you started tearing the place down. Sebastian bristled, but something in the colonel's tone, equal parts respect and challenge, kept him from snapping back. I'm not tearing anything down. I'm trying to save him. Save what's left. Colonel Fairfax snorted, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Good. About time someone around here remembered what matters. He leaned on the stall door, studying Wellington with the practiced eye of a man who'd seen generations of champions rise and fall. He's got fight left, but you'll need help. He needs medicine, careful hands. I can do it, Sebastian said, the words coming out more desperate than he meant. Fairfax's gaze softened just for a moment. You don't have to do it alone, son. Not if you're willing to learn. The conversation was interrupted by a burst of angry footsteps, Victoria storming across the yard, her voice slicing through the morning air. Sebastian, what are you thinking? We need to be practical. The estate is bankrupt. The bank wants their money, and you want to play savior to a crippled horse? Sebastian stood his ground, jaw set. Wellington is family. I won't leave him behind. If you want to sell, go ahead, but I'm staying. Victoria's face flushed, torn between rage and something deeper. She glanced at Colonel Fairfax as if only now realizing he was there. Who are you? Edmund Fairfax, ma'am, just an old horseman. I was Lady Margaret's trainer once, and I know what that stallion meant to her. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence grew taut, filled with memories neither sibling could voice. Victoria's eyes glistened, her composure slipping. You both want to play at saving the past, but you're not the ones paying the bills. I've done everything. Oxford, the law, the endless calls with the solicitors, just to keep us above water. But we can't. Not anymore. Sebastian stepped closer, his limp more pronounced. You're not alone in this, Vic. But I need to do this. For Mom. For us. Victoria's voice cracked. I already lost her. I can't lose you too, Seb. Not to a dream that's already dead. Sebastian looked at her, his stubbornness melting into something raw and honest. It's not dead. It's just sleeping. If we give up now, then all of this, everything Mom stood for, really will be gone. Victoria turned away, struggling to steady her breath, shoulders shaking. Colonel Fairfax spoke softly. He's got your mother's spirit, miss. Maybe it's time you trusted that. As the argument faded, the sound of tires on gravel interrupted them. A silver Land Rover pulled up, dust swirling in the morning light. Out stepped a young woman, not much older than Sebastian, tall, poised, with striking blue eyes and a leather medical bag slung over her shoulder. I'm Dr. Charlotte Pemberton, she announced, her voice calm but firm. I heard there's a horse in trouble. Sebastian felt a rush of relief and embarrassment all at once. He's in here. He hasn't seen a vet in years. Charlotte knelt beside Wellington with practiced gentleness, her hands moving over his injured leg, checking his pulse and temperature, murmuring reassurance. You're lucky you found him when you did. Infection's bad, but treatable. The real challenge will be keeping him moving, keeping his spirit up. She glanced up at Sebastian, her expression unreadable. You care about him. That helps more than you know. Victoria, still standing stiffly in the doorway, eyed Charlotte warily. Thank you for coming, Dr. Pemberton. How much do we owe you? Charlotte shook her head. I'm not here for payment. I grew up next door. My family has history here. My little sister died on this estate in a riding accident. I know what it's like to lose something precious. Her eyes locked on Sebastian. You'll need more than medicine to bring him back. You'll need patience, faith, and maybe a bit of luck. The weight of her words settled over everyone. For the first time, Sebastian felt hope mingling with the fear. Colonel Fairfax placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll train you, all of us, but you must promise. You won't run away from the hard parts. Sebastian nodded, the fire in his chest growing stronger. Victoria watched her brother, torn by fear and love. 6 months, Seb. That's all we have. Then the world comes knocking. Outside, the clouds began to break, shafts of sunlight illuminating the battered estate. And somewhere in the distance, the echo of horses galloping, ghosts of glory days, or maybe, just maybe, a promise that hope could be reborn. The days that followed blurred together in a quiet routine that was both exhausting and somehow sacred. Each morning, before the mist even lifted off the fields, Sebastian would limp out to the battered stables with a bucket of warm mash for Wellington, sometimes a faded tartan blanket draped over his shoulders. He greeted the old stallion with a gentle touch, whispering encouragements in the same Oxford accent his mother once used to calm wild foals. Wellington, frail but stubborn, would greet him with a nicker so soft it was almost a sigh, an echo of the champion he'd been. Victoria watched from the house, always at a distance. She'd spend her mornings on calls with the bank or poring over legal documents, her expression tight and pinched, fighting numbers and deadlines with a courage few could see. Occasionally she'd pause, her gaze lingering at the window, watching her little brother move slowly across the muddy yard. It hurt to see him struggle, to see the estate falling further behind with every sunrise. But even in her frustration, Victoria couldn't help feeling a flicker of something, pride maybe, or the faintest glimmer of hope. Charlotte Pemberton became a regular visitor, arriving in her scuffed Land Rover with a veterinary kit in the trunk and a determined smile. The first time she watched Sebastian work, she said nothing, only handed him a new bottle of antiseptic and kneeled beside Wellington, her touch firm but kind. She checked the wounds daily, applied salve, and taught Sebastian how to change bandages, her voice steady and patient. Sometimes she'd bring books, textbooks from her short, brutal years in vet school, or well-thumbed volumes of British poetry, quoting lines about courage and love. During those early days, Colonel Fairfax kept his distance. He would stand in the shadow of the stables, pipe in hand, arms crossed as he observed every gesture, every word, every moment. His presence was equal parts comfort and challenge, a living memory of the estate's glory years. On the third day, after watching Sebastian awkwardly struggle to clean Wellington's injured leg, the old colonel finally spoke. "You're doing it wrong, boy," he barked, "but you're trying. That counts for something." He stepped forward and demonstrated the old cavalry technique, how to gently support the hoof, how to keep a horse steady without fear or force. Sebastian listened, absorbing every word, grateful for the guidance. From then on, the colonel became a silent partner in their mission, offering advice and, at times, a rare, crooked smile. The routine became a lifeline. Mornings began with feeding, grooming, and the long process of cleaning wounds. Sebastian would talk to Wellington as if he were an old friend, telling him stories of better days, of fox hunts and summer picnics on the lawn, of Lady Margaret riding bareback at dawn. Sometimes, when the pain in his leg was too sharp, he'd recite Shakespeare, sonnets and speeches that made Wellington's ears flicker with curiosity. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" he'd whisper, and Charlotte, overhearing from the next stall, would grin and shake her head. By afternoon, Charlotte would join them for tea and checkups, sometimes staying to help with the heavier work. They talked about everything: horses, grief, the weight of tradition, the strange loneliness of being young and expected to carry too much. Charlotte shared stories of her late sister, lost in a tragic jump during a junior equestrian competition on the very grounds where they stood. Her pain, fresh and unhealed, became a quiet bond between her and Sebastian, neither of them needing to say much to understand the other. In the evenings, the work never truly ended. Sebastian would sit with Wellington, reading aloud or simply resting his head against the horse's warm neck. The old barn, lit by a single flickering bulb, became their sanctuary. Sometimes, when the night was especially cold, Sebastian would fall asleep beside the stall, a blanket over his shoulders, Wellington breathing steady and deep nearby. Not all was peace. Some nights Wellington would whinny in pain or panic, thrashing his head as old nightmares returned. Sebastian learned to move slowly, to keep his voice calm. More than once he woke Victoria with the commotion, and she'd come rushing in, fear etched on her face, only to find Sebastian crouched beside Wellington, murmuring comfort, both boy and horse weathering the storm together. And yet, amid all the care and heartbreak, tiny miracles began to show. Wellington, once too weak to stand for long, began to put more weight on his injured leg. He responded to Sebastian's touch, nuzzled Charlotte's hand, and, most astonishing, took his first hesitant steps around the stall, wobbling but determined. Colonel Fairfax noticed the change, nodding approvingly from the shadows. "The heart of a champion never truly dies," he said one morning, his eyes glistening. Victoria, still resolved to sell the estate, felt the old walls closing in. But even she couldn't ignore the shift in the air, a sense of possibility, however fragile. Sometimes she'd find herself wandering out to the stables, standing in the doorway, just watching, arms folded, pretending she was only checking on Sebastian. She'd listen to him read, watch Charlotte laughing, see Wellington's head rise with the cadence of a poem. One golden afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds and spilled across the fields, Sebastian read a line from Yeats, something about hope and broken things that refuse to die. Charlotte looked up at him, her eyes shining. "He likes it," she said softly. "He knows you believe in him." Sebastian smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and for the first time since the accident, he let himself believe it too. And so the early days of healing unfolded. Slow, painful, filled with doubt, but laced with moments of connection and grace. On a forgotten estate in the heart of Cotswolds, a boy, a horse, and a small, fractured family began to remember what it meant to fight for something worth saving. Wellington's recovery wasn't a straight line. Some days he surprised everyone, standing tall, nostrils flaring, almost regal. Other mornings, the pain would return, fierce and sharp, and he would retreat into himself, refusing food, eyes clouded with memory. Yet the pattern was clear. With each passing week, the spark in Wellington's eyes grew brighter. The old stallion began to remember what it meant to be a champion. It was a quiet Sunday, when Colonel Fairfax first shared Wellington's story. The old man stood at the edge of the paddock, cane in hand, eyes focused on the horse, as if seeing him both as he was now and as he had once been, shining, strong, a living legend. Sebastian had just finished wrapping Wellington's injured leg when Fairfax cleared his throat, voice rough from years of shouting across parade grounds and training rings. "You know, boy, there was a time when that horse could outrun the wind itself," the colonel began, his words hanging in the cool morning air. 12 international medals, 2 royal parades, the pride of the Ashworth Estate. Your mother was the only one he truly listened to. She said he understood every word. Sebastian listened, enraptured, as the colonel described Wellington's triumph at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. It was more than just a victory, Fairfax explained. It was the moment Wellington became a symbol, a living testament to courage and grace. The stallion had faced defeat, injury, and countless doubters, but each time he came back, stronger and wiser. He was born stubborn, the colonel continued, glancing at Sebastian with a knowing smirk. A real Ashworth trait. Nearly threw your mother at his first show, but she never gave up, and neither did he. That's what made them special. They trusted each other, completely. As the colonel spoke, Sebastian felt a surge of pride and longing. He imagined his mother riding Wellington, sunlight gleaming on the estate's green fields, both of them unafraid and unbroken. For the first time since the accident, he let those memories fill him, not just with sorrow, but with hope. If Wellington could find his way back, maybe Sebastian could too. That afternoon, under Fairfax's watchful eye, Sebastian began to train again. Not to ride, not yet, but to move with confidence, to lead Wellington with steady hands and a clear voice. The colonel insisted on tradition. Crisp commands, perfect posture, no shortcuts. A gentleman never abandons his horse, just as a horse never forgets his master. Fairfax reminded him over and over, until the words carved themselves into Sebastian's heart. Charlotte joined them, helping with physiotherapy and stretching exercises for both horse and human. Sometimes she'd coax a laugh out of Sebastian with stories from vet school or tales of her rebellious youth. Other times she was all business, insisting on precise routines, careful monitoring, and endless patience. The three of them, along with Victoria watching from a safe distance, formed an unlikely team, bound together by stubborn hope and shared loss. But not everyone was rooting for a miracle. As Wellington's recovery continued, Victoria received a call that changed everything. A property developer offering $4.2 million for Ashworth Estate, promising a swift sale and a clean break from the past. The offer was more than generous, and the deadline was tight. Just 2 months to decide, or the deal would vanish. Victoria's hands shook as she relayed the news to Sebastian, her voice strained. "We can pay off the debts, Seb. You could go to university, start fresh. We wouldn't have to live with all this pain anymore." Sebastian's face hardened. "I'm not leaving. Not now. Not when we're finally making progress." Victoria clenched her fists, her anger thinly masking her fear. "You think I want this? I don't. But you're chasing ghosts. This estate is nothing but bills and broken dreams. I've carried this family since Mom died. I can't keep doing it alone." The argument tore through the house, echoing in every empty hallway. For the first time, their pain was spoken out loud. Sebastian's guilt over the accident, Victoria's resentment over always being the responsible one, both of them grieving a mother and a life they'd never get back. Colonel Fairfax, hearing the raised voices, said nothing, only stood a little straighter, remembering his own failures, the friends he'd lost to pride and silence. That night, the tension was so thick it choked the air. Charlotte tried to mediate, urging understanding, but both siblings were too raw, too hurt to listen. In the darkness, Sebastian returned to the stables, seeking comfort in Wellington's steady breath, the warmth of his body, the simple rhythm of survival. Wellington, sensing the boy's distress, nuzzled Sebastian's shoulder, offering silent reassurance. For a moment, the storm of anger and fear faded. Sebastian realized that healing wasn't just about the body. It was about letting go of the past, forgiving himself, and daring to hope again. Outside, the winds of change were gathering. News of Wellington's slow comeback began to spread through the small Cotswolds community. Old friends and rivals, hearing rumors of the legendary stallion's recovery, called or visited, some out of curiosity, others out of skepticism. Whispers drifted to the local equestrian clubs, the pubs, even as far as the London tabloids, always hungry for a redemption story. But in the heart of Ashworth Estate, life moved at its own pace. Each day, Sebastian and Wellington made a little more progress. One more step, one more length of the paddock, one more memory reclaimed from the shadows. And each evening, as the sun set behind the ancient oaks, the old champion stood a little taller, his spirit shining through. As Victoria watched from her bedroom window, her doubts warring with her love for her brother, she found herself asking a question she hadn't dared consider. Could hope, fragile, foolish hope, really be enough to save them all? And in the hush of the Cotswolds' twilight, as the house settled into uneasy dreams, the answer felt closer than ever, carried on the wind like a promise yet to be fulfilled. It was the kind of night that seemed to press its weight against the windows and shudder through the bones of the old estate. Black clouds crowded over the Cotswolds, blotting out the moon and stars, and the wind carried the cold, wet scent of something coming. Sebastian had spent the afternoon working with Wellington, careful not to push too hard, just enough for the stallion to remember his power, not so much he would falter. Even as darkness fell, Sebastian lingered in the barn, watching Wellington pick through his evening feed, running a hand down his neck, feeling the growing muscle beneath the fragile skin. He should have gone in when Victoria called him for dinner, but a kind of nervous energy kept him rooted. There was a tension in the air, a feeling he hadn't known since the day of the accident, like the whole world was holding its breath. A single lightning bolt forked across the sky, illuminating the rolling fields and crumbling stables in a blue-white flash. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the tackroom windows, and somewhere out in the night, a fox barked in alarm. Victoria paced inside the house, unable to focus on the stack of documents on the kitchen table. Her phone buzzed with texts from the developer, but her mind was in the stable with Sebastian. When the rain started, hard and cold, she ran to the back porch and shouted for her brother, but her voice was lost in the howling wind. In the barn, Wellington grew restless, shifting his weight, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of ozone and rain. Sebastian spoke to him softly, stroking his nose, but the horse's agitation grew. The storm escalated, wind hammering the old tin roof, rain lashing sideways through every gap in the wood. Then, out of nowhere, a deafening explosion split the night. A bolt of lightning struck the far corner of the barn, and the world erupted into chaos. Flames licked up the dry hay in an instant, sending a torrent of sparks spinning into the air. Sebastian staggered back, momentarily blinded by the light and the shock. Heart pounding so hard, he thought it might break his ribs. Wellington reared, whinnying in terror, eyes wild. The old stallion thrashed in his stall, kicking at the gate, hooves clattering against the boards. "Easy! Whoa, boy! Steady now!" Sebastian shouted, trying to keep his voice steady. He fumbled with the latch, hands shaking, as smoke began to curl through the barn. Another crash, this time a support beam giving way. For a split second, Sebastian hesitated, torn between running for help and staying with the panicked horse. Then instinct took over. He forced the stall door open just as Wellington lunged forward, nearly bowling him over in his desperation to escape the flames. Outside, Victoria saw the fire blossom through the rain, an unnatural glow painting the night. Panic flooded her veins as she raced for the stables, phone forgotten, calling Sebastian's name over and over. She found him in the mud, one arm draped over Wellington's trembling back, his cane lost somewhere in the straw, both of them soaked and shivering. "Sebastian!" Victoria screamed, her voice a mix of anger and terror. She pulled at her brother, half dragging him away from the collapsing wall as embers floated down around them. For a moment, she thought they were safe. Then she saw the blood. A crimson stain spreading across Sebastian's shoulder where a falling beam had grazed him. "We have to get out!" she shouted. Sebastian staggered, refusing to let go of Wellington's halter, but the pain in his shoulder was blinding. The horse, still wild with fear, jerked and reared, nearly sending Sebastian back to the ground. Rain hammered down, turning the earth to slick black mud. Charlotte arrived in her Land Rover, skidding to a stop in the drive, headlights sweeping over the chaos. She bolted from the car, barely pausing to grab her medical bag. One look at Sebastian's white face and Wellington's heaving flanks told her everything she needed to know. There was no time for questions, only action. Charlotte set to work, barking orders with a calm authority that surprised even Victoria. "Vic, keep pressure on his shoulder. Sebastian, talk to me. Can you move your fingers? Stay awake." She checked Wellington's legs, running her hands over the wounds, murmuring soothing words, fighting against the storm and the memory of her own sister's accident. Every flash of lightning seemed to threaten a repeat of that long-ago horror, but Charlotte forced herself to focus, to keep her hands steady, to refuse the fear. Victoria was shaking, tears streaming down her face, not caring who saw. "I can't do this. I can't lose him too." The old colonel appeared in the doorway, rain pouring off his hat, eyes blazing with determination. "Get them inside. The fire's out back, but the roof might go. Hurry now, move!" He supported Sebastian with one arm, while Charlotte and Victoria led Wellington to a sheltered paddock, the horse stumbling but alive. The hours that followed blurred into a feverish, anxious haze. Charlotte stitched Sebastian's shoulder by flashlight, hands slick with rain and blood, her mind replaying every emergency lesson she'd ever learned. Wellington lay in the mud, breathing hard, his leg freshly bandaged, every tremor in his body a threat that he might not make it through the night. As the storm finally moved on, leaving behind only a burned-out corner of the barn and a family rattled to its core, Sebastian insisted on staying outside with Wellington. "He needs me," he whispered, ignoring Victoria's pleas, the pain in his voice raw. "If he gives up tonight, we'll lose him for good." Victoria wrapped a blanket around her brother, sitting beside him in the wet grass. Charlotte joined them, her eyes red but resolute. Colonel Fairfax stood watch, shoulders straight despite the exhaustion. And so, through the long, broken hours until dawn, the four of them huddled together against the chill and the darkness, refusing to surrender, their stubborn hope flickering against the night. In that moment, for all their flaws and fear, they became something more than survivors. They became a family again, bound by fire, by memory, and by the unspoken promise that, together, they would face whatever came next. The sky turned soft gray by the time the storm finally retreated. A hush fell over Ashworth Estate, a silence broken only by the distant call of crows and the gentle patter of raindrops still dripping from the burned rafters of the ruined stable. In the paddock, beneath a borrowed wool blanket, Sebastian slumped beside Wellington, his good arm draped protectively over the horse's trembling neck. He hadn't slept. He barely moved. All night he kept his watch, willing Wellington's battered body to keep breathing, fighting off the chill with body heat and stubborn hope. Victoria found them as the first thin rays of dawn cut through the broken clouds, painting the mud with gold. For a long moment, she stood at the fence, watching her brother, his hair damp, his cheeks streaked with soot, his expression so heartbreakingly young and fierce. Something in her chest cracked wide open. All the anger, all the desperation dissolved in the soft morning light. Sebastian felt her gaze and looked up, blinking against the new day. "He made it," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "We both did." Victoria knelt in the mud beside him, reaching out to brush dirt from his forehead. She said nothing at first, just let her hand linger, feeling the truth of her brother's sacrifice. Then softly, "I understand now. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. You're not just fighting for a horse, are you? You're fighting for all of us." Sebastian managed a tired smile. "I don't want to lose any more family, Vic. Not you, not him, not this place." A few hours later, Charlotte returned, exhaustion and determination written in every line of her face. She brought antibiotics, more bandages, and thermoses of hot tea, the scent of chamomile and mint cutting through the heavy air. She checked Wellington's wounds, her hands gentle, her eyes sharp for infection, and quietly marveled at the old stallion's grit. "He's not out of the woods," she said, "but he's got a fighter's heart. That counts for more than any medicine." Colonel Fairfax arrived soon after, his steps steadier than anyone had seen in years. He surveyed the barn's charred remains, then the circle of survivors in the paddock, nodding with grim approval. "You did well," he told Sebastian, clapping him on the shoulder. "Both of you. When I was young, they taught us never to leave a comrade behind, not in battle, not in life. Looks like you remembered that lesson." The four gathered in the kitchen for breakfast. Cold toast, instant coffee, and a pile of blankets. For the first time in months, laughter slipped between the walls. Sebastian recounted the wild chaos of the storm, exaggerating Wellington's heroics until Victoria was laughing through her tears, Charlotte shaking her head in disbelief. Even Colonel Fairfax cracked a crooked grin. Over the next days, the sense of unity grew stronger. They worked together, cleaning the wreckage, reinforcing the remaining stalls, hauling water and hay through the persistent Cotswolds drizzle. Charlotte set up a makeshift treatment area, teaching Victoria how to flush wounds and Sebastian how to monitor Wellington's pulse. Fairfax, energized by the crisis, took charge of logistics, calling in favors from old military friends, sourcing supplies from distant corners of the countryside. At night, as they shared simple dinners and stories of the estate's glory days, something shifted within Victoria. She watched her brother and realized this wasn't just stubborn nostalgia. It was hope, rebuilt out of loss. For the first time, she questioned whether selling the estate would truly free her, or only leave a deeper wound. One evening, after a long day of repairs, Victoria surprised everyone by sitting beside Wellington, stroking his mane, her eyes lost in thought. "What if we tried something different?" she said suddenly, her voice trembling between fear and excitement. What if, instead of selling, we did what this estate was meant to do? Host a competition, raise funds, show everyone Wellington still got heart. And so do we. Sebastian blinked in surprise. A show? You mean like Cotswold Classic? But we haven't had one in 15 years. Victoria nodded, a spark in her eyes. Exactly. We organize a charity event, invite the old crowd, the new money, the press. Give them a reason to believe in us again. We can raise enough to buy time. Maybe even save the estate. And Wellington could be the star. Colonel Fairfax's face lit up, the old fire blazing in his eyes. That's the best idea I've heard since Her Majesty handed me my retirement. We can do it, girl. I'll handle the invitations and the training schedule. You handle the paperwork. Charlotte smiled, warmth radiating in the tired kitchen. I'll call the local clinics, get the word out, and I'll make sure Wellington is ready. He might never race again, but he can show them what true recovery looks like. Sebastian looked around the table at the people he loved, feeling hope bloom in his chest for the first time since the accident. Let's do it. For Mom. For Wellington. For Ashworth. That night, the estate felt alive. Alive with purpose, alive with laughter, alive with the electric current of possibility. In the barn, Wellington rested peacefully, his breath slow and steady, as if he understood the change as well. Outside, the fields glistened under the fading storm, wildflowers pushing through the mud, trees stretching toward the first real sunlight in days. A new plan, wild and unlikely, had taken root in the ruins of old dreams. Together, they would give Ashworth Estate and themselves one last magnificent chance. 6 weeks. That was all they had. The days blurred into a rhythm of hope, sweat, and the relentless tick of the clock. From the first morning after Victoria's announcement, Ashworth Estate hummed with a purpose it hadn't known in years. Grass was mowed, old banners dusted off, and faded gold trim polished until it gleamed. Flyers went out to every village, club, and estate within 100 miles. Cotswold Classic, charity ride, a celebration of resilience. Come witness the return of a legend. Sebastian rose with the sun, often before it, shaking off the last of his nightmares to limp out to the paddocks where Wellington stood, waiting. The first days were slow and halting. The old stallion, still haunted by injury and neglect, tested each step as if the ground itself might betray him. Sebastian's own limp mirrored Wellington's. 2 survivors, broken but unwilling to give up. Colonel Fairfax led the training sessions with military precision. At dawn, he barked commands from the center of the arena, stopwatch hanging from his neck. Shoulders back, Sebastian. Soft hands. Let him trust you. That's it. Horses remember courage. They follow it. He taught Sebastian how to mount with his injured leg, how to keep balance in the saddle without favoring his pain, how to communicate through breath and posture alone. Wellington responded, day by day. The stallion's coat grew glossy, his eyes brightened, and he began to recognize the routine. The scent of sweat and liniment, the soft thud of hooves on dirt, the rhythm of Sebastian's voice reading sonnets during their cool-down laps. Sometimes, when they finished, Colonel Fairfax would lean against the fence and quietly recite lines from his own childhood, fragments of Kipling or Tennyson, as if poetry could stitch together the wounds in both man and beast. Charlotte was everywhere at once, monitoring Wellington's recovery, adjusting his diet, icing his legs, and sending texts to every contact in the equestrian world. She scheduled farriers, volunteer grooms, and even convinced the local bakery to sponsor the judge's tent. In the quiet moments between duties, she shared stories with Sebastian about her sister, the little girl who once dreamed of riding at Ashworth, who now lived on in every act of kindness Charlotte offered. Victoria transformed from reluctant heiress to unstoppable force. She wrangled sponsors, negotiated with local officials, and convinced the bank to hold off, just long enough to see if their wild plan could work. For the first time, Sebastian saw his sister as she must have been at Oxford. Brilliant, driven, absolutely unwilling to accept defeat. Sometimes, late at night, they'd sit side by side on the manor steps, reviewing lists by flashlight, and he'd catch a glimpse of the girl she'd been before grief hardened her. Not everyone believed in miracles. The local aristocracy watched with amused skepticism. Rumors swirled. Ashworth family's last stand. The crippled horse and crippled boy trying to reclaim lost glory. A few socialites arrived early, sipping champagne by the fence, offering backhanded encouragement. "Isn't it brave what you're doing, Sebastian? But don't get your hopes up. The world's changed since Ashworth's golden days." Their doubts stung, but Sebastian learned to tune it out. He focused on Wellington, on the feeling of the reins in his hands and the rise and fall of the stallion's breath beneath him. There were hard days. Days when Wellington stumbled, when Sebastian's leg gave out and he fell, when fear threatened to undo all their progress. Each time, Colonel Fairfax would help him up, dust him off, and mutter, "Champions aren't made from perfection, boy. They're made from the will to rise again." As the event approached, the estate became a beehive of activity. Vendors arrived to set up tents. Kids painted signs. Local news crews rolled their cameras, hungry for a feel-good story. Neighbors who hadn't set foot on Ashworth land in years returned to volunteer, bringing with them memories and casseroles. The place that had once felt haunted by loss now buzzed with possibility. On the eve of the competition, Colonel Fairfax found Sebastian and Wellington walking in the fading light. The colonel's voice was soft, almost reverent. "Did you know years ago Wellington tore a tendon before Windsor? Most people wanted to put him down. Your mother wouldn't hear of it. She said, 'A true champion doesn't care what's broken, he cares what's possible.' And they won against every odd. This isn't just a comeback for him, Sebastian. It's for you, for your family, for everyone who's ever been told their best days are behind them." Sebastian swallowed hard, looking at the horse that had become his anchor. He understood then that the Cotswold Classic wasn't about victory or legacy. It was about standing up, battered and changed, and daring to be seen anyway. The night before the event, the family gathered for a quiet dinner in the old dining hall. Victoria, Sebastian, Colonel Fairfax, Charlotte, and even a few friends who'd become like family in the whirlwind of preparation. Laughter echoed off the walls, mixing with the wind outside and the faint, ever-present scent of hay. They toasted to the past, the future, and to Wellington, living proof that even after the darkest storm, hope could be reborn. As Sebastian lay awake, listening to the steady breath of the world outside, he felt the weight of fear and anticipation mingle in his chest. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. Tomorrow, they would show the world that the heart of Ashworth and of every broken champion still beat strong. The morning of the Cotswold Classic arrived sharp and clear, the sun burning away the last of the mist that had haunted the estate for weeks. From dawn, the grounds came alive with the thrum of nervous energy. Vendors set up tents painted in bright stripes. Horses snorted and pawed at the soft earth, and the air carried the scent of cut grass, excitement, and freshly baked pastries. Crowds spilled onto the grounds in numbers no one had dared hope for. Neighbors, aristocrats, old friends, and new faces, all drawn by the promise of something miraculous. Sebastian rose with the first birdsong, every nerve humming. In the stable, Charlotte checked Wellington one last time, her hands gentle but businesslike. "He's stiff, but his spirit's good," she said, glancing up at Sebastian. "You've done everything you can. Now it's just the two of you out there." Sebastian swallowed hard, running his hand down Wellington's warm flank, feeling the old horse's heart beating, steady and brave. He whispered, "You ready, old friend?" Wellington turned his head and nuzzled Sebastian's cheek, the simple gesture grounding him. Colonel Fairfax appeared, immaculate in his old cavalry coat, silver whistle at his throat. He handed Sebastian a pair of gloves, Lady Margaret's, well worn but still soft. "For luck," the colonel said, "and to remind you, this is about spirit, not finish lines." Outside, the crowd pressed in, filling the makeshift grandstands, chattering with anticipation. A few reporters from London hovered near the judge's tent, snapping photos and scribbling notes. The bank manager sat near the front, arms folded, watching everything with the cold eyes of a man who'd bet on the estate's failure. Victoria moved among the guests with practiced poise, greeting dignitaries, checking last-minute details, offering a tight smile even as her hands shook with nerves. The Cotswold Classic began with a parade of horses, each rider cheered by the crowd, but all eyes inevitably settled on the battered stallion and the limping young man at the end of the line. Sebastian wore a simple navy jacket, his hair brushed back, his expression resolute. Wellington, though still walking with a pronounced limp, held his head high, mane braided with a single blue ribbon, Lady Margaret's favorite color. The race itself was simple, a short course with 3 jumps and a challenging final hill. The rules had been adjusted for charity, but the stakes felt as real as any championship. Sebastian and Wellington started dead last, a deliberate choice, letting the others thunder out ahead in a blur of shining coats and flashing hooves. From the beginning, whispers rippled through the crowd. "That horse can barely walk. What are they thinking? He'll never finish." But Sebastian kept his focus, feeling every stride, every surge of Wellington's muscles beneath him. They took the first jump slowly, almost painfully, but cleared it clean. Sebastian gritted his teeth, determined not to let fear or pity dictate their pace. The second jump loomed, and Wellington hesitated, memories of pain flickering in his dark eyes. For a split second, Sebastian thought the old stallion would refuse, but then he remembered Colonel Fairfax's words. "Champions are made from the will to rise again." He leaned forward, whispered encouragement, and Wellington launched over the rail, legs tucked tight, landing heavy but upright. The crowd gasped, then erupted into applause. By the time they reached the final stretch, they were no longer the object of scorn. They were the beating heart of the event, every eye on them. Sebastian could hear shouts of support now, not just from Victoria and Charlotte, but from strangers, from children pressed against the rails, from local trainers who knew what it meant to come back from the edge. The last jump stood at the base of the hill, a modest fence by normal standards, but to Wellington and Sebastian, it might as well have been Everest. Wellington faltered, sides heaving, sweat darkening his coat. Sebastian felt his own legs scream in protest. He could stop now. No one would blame him. But he looked at the crowd, at the hope in their faces, at Victoria's hands clasped over her heart, and he knew there was no turning back. "Let's finish this," he whispered, voice steady, and together they surged forward. Wellington leapt, higher, braver, more beautifully than he had in years. For a heartbeat they seemed to fly, and then they crashed down on the far side, both staggering but upright. The finish line glimmered just ahead. Sebastian urged Wellington on, feeling every ache and every dream in his bones. They crossed together, not first, not even close, but to a roar that drowned out every doubt and every memory of failure. The stands erupted, people on their feet, hats in the air, even the bank manager wiping his eyes. For a moment, time seemed to pause. Colonel Fairfax marched onto the field and saluted. Charlotte ran to hug Sebastian, nearly knocking him off his feet. Victoria burst into tears, laughing and sobbing as she rushed to them, arms flung around both brother and horse. The awards ceremony was a blur. Other winners were called up, ribbons and cups handed out. But when the time came for the Spirit of Cotswolds award, the honor reserved for the competitor who best embodied courage and heart, there was no question. Sebastian and Wellington stood center stage, the battered pair shining brighter than any champion. Flashbulbs popped, reporters clamored, and in that moment, the miracle of Ashworth Estate was born, broadcast across England and beyond, a story of second chances, family, and impossible hope. As dusk fell over the Cotswolds, the estate buzzed with laughter, music, and the sweet relief of a dream restored. For the first time in years, Ashworth felt like home. And in the quiet of the stable, away from the lights and noise, Sebastian pressed his forehead to Wellington's and whispered, "We did it. You did it." The horse flicked his ears and sighed, a simple, grateful sound that said everything words could not. The story of the Cotswold Classic spread farther and faster than anyone expected. The next morning, as the early sun spilled across the estate, Sebastian woke to the distant sound of laughter and the not-so-distant ring of his phone. Reporters from London, invitations for interviews, requests for photos of Wellington from magazines he'd only ever seen in waiting rooms. For a moment, it all felt like a dream, like the kind of fairy tale his mother used to tell him before bed. But the ache in his leg and the smell of liniment on his hands grounded him in reality. This was no fantasy. It was the hard-won result of pain, persistence, and something more, a sense of duty that felt almost ancient. At breakfast, the kitchen buzzed with excitement. Charlotte read aloud a column from the Times. Ashworth Estate's miraculous return proves that heritage and heart matter more than money or bloodline. In an age obsessed with progress, perhaps it's the old ways, loyalty, tradition, resilience, that still mean the most. Victoria, for once, didn't have a comeback. She just sipped her tea, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Colonel Fairfax, who had become something like family through fire and trial, sat at the head of the table, face hidden behind a copy of the Telegraph. "See here, boy," he grumbled, trying to hide his smile. "They called you the spirit of British courage. Never thought I'd see the day." Sebastian rolled his eyes, but inside he felt the words settle deep, a strange, quiet comfort, the sense that he'd finally made his mother proud. After breakfast, the family gathered in the drawing room, Sebastian, Victoria, Charlotte, and Colonel Fairfax, joined by a few of the volunteers who had become regulars over the last weeks. Someone brought scones, and Sebastian's old school friend Jamie even tuned the battered piano in the corner, filling the air with gentle, hopeful music. In that moment, it was easy to believe they had weathered the worst. that maybe, just maybe, Ashworth Estate was home again. But beneath the laughter, the victory, the press attention, something more important lingered, a lesson rooted deeper than any headline could capture. Later that day, as the last tents came down and the paddocks emptied, Colonel Fairfax sat with Sebastian by the paddock fence. Wellington grazed nearby, his coat shining in the late afternoon sun. The old colonel tapped his cane against the ground, his tone soft but serious. "You know, boy, nobility isn't just a title or an inheritance. It's a responsibility. Noblesse oblige, as they say. To be noble is to carry the weight of your family, your land, your history, even when it's heavy, even when nobody else remembers why it matters. Your mother understood that. So do you." Sebastian nodded, letting the words sink in. He thought of everything they'd endured: loss, anger, failure, and the choice, again and again, to get up and keep fighting. "I used to think being noble was about always winning," he admitted. "But I think it's more about what you do when you lose, when things break and you can't put them back the way they were. You don't give up on the people or the animals who need you." Fairfax smiled, his eyes softening. "That's it. Stiff upper lip, as the English say. Not because we feel nothing, but because we keep going no matter what. The real strength is in carrying on, even when the world thinks you're finished." Charlotte joined them, setting down a cup of strong tea for Sebastian. She had been quiet all morning, the events of the classic still working through her mind. "I watched you yesterday," she said, "and I realized it isn't just about Wellington or Ashworth. It's about all of us, everyone who's ever felt left behind or broken. You gave people hope. Maybe that's what matters most." Sebastian blushed, unsure how to answer. We couldn't let him go. Not when he still had fight left in him. That's what my mom always said. Sometimes what's broken doesn't need fixing. It just needs someone to believe it's still worth loving. Victoria, standing nearby, overheard. She stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I spent so long thinking I had to fix everything, to make it all perfect again. But you're right. The world isn't perfect, and neither are we. All we can do is love what we have, fight for what matters, and help others do the same." News of the classic reached more than just the local papers. Soon, families from across England began to write to the Ashworths. Letters of gratitude, stories of their own struggles, photos of children and horses overcoming odds that once seemed impossible. People wanted to visit, to see Wellington, to walk the grounds and remember what it meant to endure. The message grew larger than Ashworth, larger than the classic itself. Schools began teaching the story in assemblies. Local charities reached out for partnerships. Even the stiffest old lords sent notes of admiration, some with generous checks attached. Ashworth became a symbol not only of a family's perseverance, but of something deeper: the need for community, for compassion, for holding on to hope when everything seems lost. One evening, with the sun setting over the Cotswold hills, Sebastian sat alone in the field, Wellington at his side, and thought about what they'd done. The estate still needed repairs. The future was uncertain. But for the first time, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than doom. He stroked Wellington's neck, smiling as the old stallion leaned into his touch. Around them, the sounds of laughter, hammers, and song drifted on the evening breeze. Sebastian whispered, "We made it. We're still here." In that moment, he understood. True nobility wasn't about the medals on the wall or the blood in your veins. It was about the courage to keep going, the humility to accept help, and the grace to reach out a hand to those who cannot rise on their own. And as night fell over Ashworth, the lesson rang clear as a bell across the Cotswolds. Resilience, compassion, and tradition would carry them into a new future, one where every broken soul, human or animal, could find a place to heal. The weeks after the Cotswold Classic unfolded in a way that no one at Ashworth Estate could have predicted. What had started as a desperate gamble, one last attempt to save a family, a horse, and a dream, became the spark for something larger. The estate, once shrouded in the hush of loss and faded grandeur, now pulsed with new life. Every morning, the gates opened to a trickle of visitors. Families, teachers, children with crutches or wheelchairs, horse lovers, old friends, drawn by the story of Wellington and the hope that something broken might become beautiful again. Victoria made it official in the local press first, then in a heartfelt post that went viral. Ashworth would not be sold. Instead, the estate would be transformed into Wellington Sanctuary, a center for the rehabilitation of injured horses and a haven for children and adults with disabilities. She shared photos of the classic, of Sebastian leading Wellington through the finish line, of Charlotte and Colonel Fairfax tending to animals and children in the fields, laughter and sunlight and second chances in every image. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, not just from wealthy patrons, but from ordinary families, school children, even strangers from as far away as New Zealand and Canada. Companies offered sponsorships. Veterinarians volunteered weekends. Construction crews arrived to repair what the fire and time had nearly destroyed, turning the old carriage house into therapy rooms, the library into classrooms, and the stables into spaces that rang with the voices of kids discovering the magic of horses for the first time. Sebastian found himself busier than he'd ever been, juggling interviews, giving tours, and, most importantly, being the heart of the sanctuary. He worked with Wellington every day, helping other horses begin their journey back from trauma and neglect, sharing stories and scars with the children who came to ride, to heal, to believe. At first, he was shy, unsure, still haunted by doubts about what he had to offer. But with every smile, every small victory, a child mounting a horse for the first time, a rescued mare learning to trust again, a mother's quiet thank you, he understood the truth of what they'd built. Colonel Fairfax stayed on as trainer and mentor, his legendary bark now softened by pride. He taught both children and adults, his war stories giving way to lessons in patience and grace. Sometimes, in the evenings, he and Sebastian would walk the perimeter of the estate together, the colonel's cane and Sebastian's limp a testament to the battles they'd survived and the ground they refused to surrender. He often said, "A man is measured not by what he saves for himself, but by what he gives away." It was a motto that fit Ashworth's new mission perfectly. Charlotte became the sanctuary's resident vet, her days a blur of medicine, laughter, and hope. She created programs that paired children with gentle horses, believing, rightly, that healing could happen for both when given a chance. Sometimes she'd pause in her rounds, watching Sebastian read Shakespeare to Wellington in the paddock, a circle of children at his feet. Her heart felt fuller than it ever had. Her own wounds, though not vanished, were now laced with gratitude and purpose. Victoria, too, changed. No longer weighed down by loneliness and the burden of impossible expectations, she thrived as the director of the sanctuary. She managed finances, coordinated events, and found herself surrounded by friends and allies she never knew she had. In the evenings, she would join Sebastian, Charlotte, and the colonel for long dinners in the once-empty dining hall, the walls echoing with laughter and music instead of ghosts. The years slipped by, each one leaving Ashworth more alive than the last. Wellington, cared for and cherished, grew old in peace. He became a fixture in local folklore, the horse who taught a family and a whole community the meaning of resilience. He lived to the remarkable age of 25, his mane gone silver, his step slow but proud. On the day he passed, children from across the county came to lay flowers at his paddock, and the local papers ran the headline, "Farewell to the champion of second chances." But his story didn't end there. Ashworth Sanctuary became a beacon, a place where wounded spirits, human and animal, learned that broken things didn't have to be hidden or discarded. Sometimes, the only repair needed was love, patience, and the stubborn refusal to give up. The walls of the old manor filled with letters, photos, and stories from across the world. Your story helped my son walk again. Because of Wellington, my daughter believes in herself. Thank you for reminding us that kindness matters. Sebastian grew into a quiet leader, becoming a young ambassador for the preservation of heritage, for animal welfare, for disability rights. He spoke at schools and conferences, always humble, always reminding listeners, true nobility isn't about where you come from. It's about how you treat those who need you most. People listened, people changed. A ripple of compassion spread from the sanctuary into the wider world, and each year, on the anniversary of the classic, the estate held a festival, music, food, games, and the Wellington Parade, where children and horses marched together, celebrating survival and second chances. At dusk, Sebastian would stand beneath the ancient oaks, surrounded by the new family they had built, and read aloud the message etched on the sanctuary's gate. Sometimes what's broken doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be loved. As the sun set on another golden evening, the land alive with joy and belonging, Sebastian knew the truth. The Ashworth legacy was safe, not in the medals or titles, but in every act of hope, every hand outstretched to the fallen, every story shared by firelight. Wellington's heart beat on, not just in memory, but in every life he had touched. If this story moved you, if you found hope in these words, remember, you too can be someone's second chance. Like and subscribe to help us share the message of compassion, courage, and the healing power of love. And finally, true nobility isn't about bloodlines. It's about never turning away from those who can't fight for themselves. That is the legacy of Wellington, of Ashworth, and of every soul who chooses hope.